Hey folks, welcome to episode 27 of If I Rule the World, the system change podcast that's all about flipping the lid on the systems that run our lives, from natural systems, economic systems, to systems of the mind, body and soul. So I'm just going to get straight in today. There's no time for our usual little pithy pre-title tease. We got a lot to get through before we jump into this episode proper. First of all, just to kick off, I'm just going to acknowledge this because it has been a really rough week, a really heavy heart week. I think especially for people who are really involved and concerned about the ongoing genocide in Gaza, and it is a genocide. The Lebanese ground invasion, Sudan, Congo, the list does go on. There is a lot of grief, horror, and outrage. And if this is you, I just want to say you're not alone. From what I can see out there, we're not alone. I promise you, upholding international law, basic humanity, is a majority interest. Living peacefully in a safe and abundant world is a majority interest. It's bleak right now out there, but there are those faint little pinpricks of light, just like this lady.
I was born in Springfield and I've lived here most of my life. I can't believe these Haitian immigrants would come here and fill jobs that local Springfield residents would not or could not do. They're making some of the local losers look bad by their example. It's unbelievable. The Haitian immigrants are working overtime to save up money to buy up all the dilapidated, condemned, and boarded up homes in Springfield, then fixing those houses up to make them livable again. This is raising property values across the city and county to the point where the valuation of all real estate in the city surpassed $1 billion last year for the first time ever. I can't believe they're helping to fund our government and beautify our neighborhoods. These Haitian immigrants are now spending money in our community to where new restaurants and retail spaces keep opening up across the city. What absolute madness. Now we have new businesses in town generating more tax revenue for our city and county. I have a good paying job with great benefits, but because I have main character syndrome and the entire world should revolve around me, I want the exorbitant benefits that some of these Haitian immigrants get, which is $292 per SNAP, aka food stamps, and $363 in cash per month for a single adult. Everyone knows that $655 per month lets you live like a millionaire in Springfield. This is lunacy.
That is a masterclass in satire. Somebody commented on this Instagram post, and I'm going to put a link in the show notes for you if you want to look it up later. But we've also had what I'm calling that pinprick of light from one of our very own listeners, Antonia, who is a co-director at Community Roots, which is a 1-acre no-dig market garden in Cornwall. And she shared this feedback about this podcast. And so Antonia says, I'm working my way through the previous episodes of your podcast, and I've been recommending it to everyone. So thanks for that, Antonia. She continues, on a personal level, it feels like you're speaking to so many of the things in my head. I've already taken a few great tips from listening to the podcast, including inviting one of our young volunteers to join the advisory board, which I got from your Pen Pond episode, which is episode 6 of the podcast, if you guys want to look that up. And Antonia says she's vowing to look at her data storage footprint, which is from the episode with Candice Rondo. And at Community Roots, we're determined to do things differently, to find new ways that prioritize the health of individuals, our community, and our planet, and then to model and share what we learn with others. So your podcast is providing amazing food for thought. So thank you for that. And I tell you what, thank you, Antonia. Like, that kind of feedback is what this is all about for me, for Editor Jake, for producer Sam, for our whole team. And also, what our sponsor is. And I'm just going to do a little bit of an out-of-the-routine shout-out to our sponsors, Triodos Bank. It's what it's all about for all of us. Getting to speak to all the incredible guests that come onto this podcast, listening back to their interviews, reflecting, preparing these little intros and outros, and hoping to pull something together, helping to join those dots, do my little tiny little bit, and get feedback like that is what it's all about. So let's get on to today's guest. He's going to be bringing some really good energy. He's a fellow podcaster, podcasting from literally the other side of the planet relative to where I'm sitting in Cornwall. So Matua Marc Peard is a radio presenter, sports announcer, and host of his own podcast, Marc Peard Sports Today, and also the co-host of New Zealand's #1 podcast, The Morning Shift Show. And actually, you know what? Before we go on, I'm going to get one thing straight right from the get-go. From here on, you're going to hear the name Aotearoa, which is maybe not familiar. It is the Maori name for the land and the country that I'm guessing, like me, most of you will know as New Zealand. There is a growing movement to acknowledge the land by both its names, Aotearoa New Zealand. So getting Matua Marc, like I said, it was a little bit of a shot in the dark because I've been listening to him and his co-hosts, all of them Maori, on the Morning Shift show. And well, first of all, it's funny as hell, but also like quite deep and vulnerable in parts at times, always with the vibes. And as I've been listening to their podcast for most of this year, I started to realize that I've been absorbing, by osmosis, what possibly is a very unique model of decolonization or system change by another name. And I really wanted to hear from someone who is experiencing this, like a sort of, this is just everyday life that isn't, part of someone's PhD thesis or something. And I said there was a lot to get through on this podcast. There's one more thing I really want to do, and I'm going to slow right down because this is like, I'm not going to lie, it's going to be intense. I want to hold space. I want to pull back the curtain on the pain and the trauma that actually underpins the conversation that Matua, Marc, and I will have and that you're about to hear. This is just a little snippet of what I think we are all trying to do, which is heal from collective wounds, intergenerational trauma of humanity's shared history of colonization. Here we go.
My name is Andrew Windy Boy. I'm a Chippewa Cree. I did 2 boarding schools, one in Wapton Indian School in Wapton, North Dakota. There's Flandreau Indian School in Flandreau, South Dakota. Mid-60s to early 70s took me to the boarding school where I wasn't allowed to talk my native tongue or practice my native ways. They took me away from all of that and used me for talking that. It was my first language. I didn't know any other language. So whenever I talk, it came out. Cree would come out, and whenever I talk, I get hit. I got hit so much I lost my tongue. I lost my native tongue. The only thing I remember was my Indian name, which is Senukihiu, means old man eagle. That's the only Cree I knew. Hope someday somebody will hear me.
That's heartbreaking to listen to. But I came across that audio on an Instagram post. And I just, all of a sudden, something lit up in my head, some connection between the conversation you're about to hear and this history, this story that is everywhere, just in the mid-60s and 70s, which puts Old Man Eagle just 10 years ahead of me. This is our lifetime, guys, our living memory. But this story is in Aotearoa, it's in Uganda, it's in Wales, it's in my family. You will hear it everywhere. You'll hear it from our past guests on this podcast series, and you're going to hear it today in Matua Marc's Strength of Feeling, about the need to reclaim language, the need to reclaim culture, and the need to reclaim our sense of belonging to this earth. And you're going to hear it through what is actually a really warm, generous, funny, thoughtful, shooting the shit type of conversation. So that's enough for me. Over to Matua Marc for a proper introduction.
My name is Marc Anthony Peard. Marc Anthony, yep, like the singer. That's my adopted name, but Marc Anthony Mendoza is my birth name. Mendoza is actually the name comes from my dad's lineage, who was UK broadcaster. I never really met him or knew of him, but he worked at I don't know, there's like a Talk Sport or something in the UK. He was on Talk Sport, and he came down to Aotearoa and was broadcasting here in New Zealand. And then he met my mother, who had my sister and my brother, and then and then we were adopted. We were taken from our mum, and I grew up in a Pākehā family, which is a European family. My mother was Maori. My dad, obviously, very English, coming from, still had the accent over here, but never really had much to do with him or really met him as such. And so grew up in a east coast town of New Zealand called Gisborne, or Tairāwhiti, and then and kind of had something about me. Never was really a farm boy. Knew I was never like meant to be on the farm. Like a dead giveaway was my mum always used to tell me this story about how we used to have this milking cow called Daisy and Blossom. And my job was actually to get Blossom in every day, so we'd milk the cow and so on. And my mum used to tell me this story of how I used to walk behind Blossom and hold her tail like a microphone and either commentate like her every step into the place where you milk her, or I'd be singing into the tail of this cow as we were going through. And so always kind of knew farming wasn't my jam. And so I actually wasn't great at high school, never loved people and loved friends and loved eating lunch, loved playing sport. And all my friends took off to university. A great thing in New Zealand, I'm not sure if it's the same where you come from, but the small towns, you've got to leave them or else you'll stay there forever. And you'll marry the person who, was your first love. And not that that's a bad thing, but you can get trapped in a very small place. And I felt like I had to, I needed more in my life. And so I actually went down to study drama and learn the art of acting. And I always remember one of my best lessons I ever took from my drama school days was how can you honestly ask people to come and watch you on stage and pay money to come and watch you play the character on stage if you don't truly play a character? So to truly play a character, you kind of need to know yourself well enough to be able to separate yourself from the character, and then you can truly portray something on stage knowing full well it isn't you out there on the stage. And I always remember that. So a big goal of mine was getting to know myself and who I am and what's important to me and why I tick the way I tick. And it's a constant journey, but it's one that I'm actually aware of. I think a lot of people will go through life never really quite being aware of the journey that they're on and never really quite taking note as to why they think the way they think, why they are angry at those things that make them angry. So drama school taught me a lot, but broadcasting was always the thing I wanted to do. I always loved radio. And so then I did a 3-year drama course that had 3 weeks of broadcasting in it. So I did all the stage stuff, all the dancing, all the other stuff, everything you do at a drama school to get a diploma in performing arts. But ultimately what I wanted it for was that 3 weeks of learning how to I don't know, tell a story without the medium of sight. I love the idea of being able to keep somebody's attention and really explain a story using the vocabulary and using our words and that feeling of what it's like when you're about to get out the car when you were younger and you used to listen to the radio, you're like, oh, I'm just going to wait. And call it selfish.
I still do that, actually.
I don't know if that's narcissistic of me wanting to control from afar, but I don't know. There's something magical about that. It's such that means it's such an intense medium that you are using just sound to really encapsulate somebody's attention. And I think we now live in a world where it's so easy to be able to dial you up and we can see each other and we can talk, but we're going to lose the art of being able to hold attention just from vocals alone. And that to me is sad because it's so easy to be able to do it. And that's what drew me to radio and that's what drew me to podcasting ultimately and the end of it. Because, after a 6-month course on radio, which once I left drama school and then I did 6 months in radio, I worked in the radio industry here in New Zealand for 20 odd years. And it was both heartbreaking and revealing that it isn't as magical as what it is. It's actually a day-to-day job. It's really hard, but I loved doing it, and I threw myself into it, and I've always enjoyed telling a story, no matter what it is. As you can tell, I haven't stopped talking for this. So I think once that the radio job kind of broke my heart twice, being made redundant from COVID was one of the first one. We shut down the sports station that I was a part of, and then secondly, a financial decision from the bosses on a different radio station, they decided to shut that down as well. So I didn't lose my job because I was useless at it. It was business decisions from the top. And so that's where I got the opportunity to create something with a couple of friends of mine with the podcast. And we've done it for a year and a bit now, over 10 million downloads.
It's awesome.
It's just been amazing. Traveled over to New York within the first year to go see T-Pain and hang out with him. We've had so many successes, it's just been unbelievable. And I don't know, the description that people would give of our podcast is we deal in hope and we deal in energy, and we deal in positivity. And there's three guys who are, we're dads first. We're storytellers as well. We are Maori. We are in touch with our cultural roots, but we belong at the tables that these big radio stations belong at, and that's our belief. So why not us has been the thing that's got us through, and we're not afraid of putting our heads down and working hard. And for us, what we've been able to achieve in New Zealand is like we've changed the media landscape of how New Zealand consumes media, and that's been probably our biggest joy coming out of this year. And obviously finding out that you found us as well is one of the big joys as well.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. I really do genuinely like that. You're right. It deals in energy, hope, good vibes. I think you guys handle some really delicate stuff as well. Sometimes you go deep. I think that's what I find really interesting, is that you're able to do it all. So one of the reasons why I was like, okay, I love your podcast, but why bring you on to mine? Like, this is a system change podcast. Like, what has that got to do with anything? You've talked about like changing the landscape in terms of broadcasting, but a prior guest on my podcast, Leah Penniman, we were talking about indigenous knowledge in the context of nature and restoration and ecology and conservation, all that stuff. And she said something that really hit home, because she said, yeah, indigenous isn't just like ancient. Indigenous is past, present, and future. And she like made this point that she was like, there's indigenous cultures alive today, living amongst us. We just don't see them. And that stayed with me. And then the more I listened to your podcast, The Morning Shift Show, I started to think, hang on a second, I think this is what this is. Because up here in the north, we talk about indigenous and we might talk about Maori, and it sounds like a small fringe community living in an otherwise colonized Aotearoa. And I just wanted to kind of get your, because that was a big reason for bringing you on here, was thinking, okay, I think this is a chance for my listeners, who I'm going to make a big assumption that we are all, I call it in a north up world. We're sort of so used to seeing the map with the northern hemisphere on the top. So you're like an ambassador, from distant lands, at least relative to where I am sitting right now in Cornwall. How much of being Maori, because you've already said your dad, your biological father was English, your adopted father was, what was the word that you used?
Oh, Pākehā. So Pākehā in Māori is of lighter skin. So
right.
Generally anybody who is of lighter skin is Pākehā, and said in a most respectful way. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
In a nice way.
That's good to know as well. So you're kind of sitting between two cultures, like literally you embody both. But I hear a lot of like Maori pride, if you like. So how does that all fit in? Like, sort of, how is Maori a living, breathing culture?
It's so funny to hear you that whole north being at the top and the south. Like, Māori is so ingrained in New Zealand and Aotearoa, as it's more than a culture to an extent. It's more than a skin color, and it's more than a tattoo, and it's more than a taonga or a greenstone that it's everything. Like, it is Māori's a funny one. It's sure, it started off obviously as the culture, but it's so ingrained in us that, someone walking down the street, kia ora, like, that's hello. It's on the same level as what you would be used to someone saying, so the language has interwound itself at a point where Māori, like the haka, for instance, is another great one. People will see the haka and they'll be like, oh, here we go again. We just don't notice the haka anymore. Like, it is so normal to us. And I think we're at a poignant place at the moment with our current government, because there was a lot of inroads made, I think, in the last government around equity. Now, equity and Māori as a people have always been overrepresented in lack of education, in health statistics, all the things you don't want to be overrepresented in. Māori have been there. And that's due to a genuine distrust of the system. And it's always been there. But I think the beauty for us as Māori, and proud Māori, is, and this is going to sound a little dark to be fair, but we actually have a living, breathing example of what Indigenous culture being crushed out of a system looks like right next door in Australia, with the Aboriginal people. The First Nations people, we see, we hear, they see and hear us, and it's a real reminder of just how strong and potent Māori have been within keeping the culture alive. And for you, and that's why I think for you being able to look all the way from the UK down on New Zealand and seeing it, you're like, wow, what's the story here? This little group of, but actually, I would say most kids nowadays would know basic Māori because it's taught in our schools, and there's been a real battle to have it taught in our schools. They know when someone says kia ora, or they know, ka kite, inoho, like all the words that and we just use them, keeps the culture alive. And the language is the culture. It is being able to show that that's a real sign. And there's been a generation that have now, a while back, my parents, the parents before them, the language was beaten from them. No one was allowed to, by the colonizers, there was no one who was allowed to speak Māori. Māori they tried their hardest to get rid of the language, and therefore the culture would slowly die out. It's done the opposite, because now Māori speakers, there's never been more fluent speakers in Aotearoa now. There's never been a bigger drive to really show that, show out. And it's funny because we're at this point now where, and I mentioned the haka before, where you can't have part of the culture and not accept the other, is the way we're thinking now. You can't expect to commercialize Air New Zealand with the koru designs on the tail. Can't have that on the tail without paying tribute to the culture and being more than that. So it's in a really, for me as a 43-year-old, I've seen, it's been a little bit, you're a little bit whakamā, which is shy to use the language, a little bit whakamā to be Māori. From when I was younger to where we are now, where we have proud, fluent speaking young kids coming through the system. Jordan and Brooke both have their kids in Māori schools, so they'll grow up speaking fluent Māori and English. There's a real emphasis now where we've never been prouder to be who we are, and it's not forcing the door down, you know what I mean? But it's not being forced away from being at the table is kind of the key here. So we're at a point now where it's not, you have to learn Māori, you have to do this. It's actually trendy, and it's actually in vogue to make the effort to make sure that something that makes us uniquely us is kept alive and is growing. And we always have that reminder again. I'll restate it. We just need to look an hour on an airplane ride over to Australia to see how lucky we are as a culture to be thriving and to be strong. Now, we got plenty more we need to do, and we all know it, but with social media, with influences of Māori heritage, there's a real, not expectation, but there's a real kind of want to make sure that you are waving the flag. So when we mention words on the podcast, we're filled with pride, knowing that you've heard that and go, I reckon I could, if someone said kia ora to me, and even when you said Aotearoa, like that was awesome. That means that makes me proud to know that you're using the name of this country as it was laid down by the Māori.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's so many things I've learned. Whānau is people, people,
family.
Right?
That's your family.
What's morena? Is that a kind of, I hear that a lot. What does that mean?
That's morning. That's morning twice.
Morning.
Yeah, so morena. Morena is, morning. Yeah.
Morena. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is just sort of, you just kind of absorb these words because you use them a lot in your podcast. And it kind of reminds me of Kenya, which is where I was born, still have a lot of connections to. And Kenya is a mix of many languages. There's English, there's Swahili, Kiswahili, but almost everyone will have another language as well, whether it's Kikuyu, Luo, Kamba, Gujarati, Sikh. There's a real mix of people. So especially like the millennials, the Gen Zs, they just mix it all up and it's pretty effortless. And if you spend enough time around it, the sense I get is, you pick up lots of different cultures and everyone's sort of represented, but at the same time, there's still a really strong sense of being Kenyan. Everybody wears a beaded Kenyan flag round their wrist. It's become sort of ubiquitous, and it actually doesn't really matter who you are. Anyone can wear that if they feel Kenyan. And so what I find here in the UK, particularly, I mean, Wales has got its own battle with language and culture and trying to reclaim a Welsh identity. Cornwall, where I live, is a much smaller movement, but it's still very much the same. The Cornish feel very distinct from the English. the Scots. I don't need to go into that, and the Irish. But what I sort of find, what I would love to try and do in my work here, and I already have started to do it. Like, so for example, writing an article for BBC Wildlife magazine, literally the issue that's going to go out this month. You know, I did use Aotearoa New Zealand, and that got picked up by the editor saying, "Oh no, we'll say New Zealand, also known as." And I was like, "Oh no!" And I managed to kind of fight my corner because like it's on their tourist board website, so it must be official. So you know, hopefully by the time this goes out, the article's gone out and it's all good. But you know, it is. What I find interesting is that from a UK or an English perspective, there's a sense of like feeling threatened by reintegrating cultures and languages. And the word that's often used, which I do think sounds threatening, is decolonizing. And it really gets people's hackles up. So what I'm trying to get a sense of is there a place in the world where this process that some people call decolonizing is happening without it being a threat?
I wouldn't say what's happening here in New Zealand is a decolonization, because it does feel like there's something to be lost for those who are of a skin color that isn't brown in this country, at least. And I don't think that's the case. I think we've been through that. I think we've tried that. I think what's happened is you get nowhere when the walls go up and people shut down and people think that they are under threat. I think what's happening is that people are starting to see more and more and more what an enriched culture and a unique culture we have if Māori is slowly but surely more and more day to day ours. And when I say ours, I mean everybody who lives in this country. I think we understand we are a small nation. We're tiny. We're 6 million of us. That's nothing, really.
Wow, really?
But for us to be, you've the real depth of connection from the people to the land, and I think to everyone in general, is different when you've only got 6 million people. I can't pull the fingers, curse at somebody in the street and not expect to see them at least 3 days later. So like there's real repercussions when there are 6 million people in a country. So you can't just throw a baby out with the bathwater, for instance.
Yeah.
You've got to know, like, you've got to really think through your feelings and emotions, especially if it's something along the lines of, hey, this culture isn't a culture that I identify with. I think what we're learning too, though, and because this country is generally run by sport, we love our sport, we love our rugby. Māori are that's such an entrenched tradition within everything that we do in this country, from the language we speak to the sports we play. Before any of our national sides play, men's sides at least, they'll do a haka. Women will lay down a challenge as well. If it's the Black Ferns, they're playing against England this weekend. It's so entrenched in us that this is who we are, and it's our calling card. So we've got this advantage of being 6 million people. British colonizers from back in the day are still so far away from us. It's still, they're going to take at least 18 hours to get to fly over if we start playing up. We can get away with a bit in those 18 hours. So like, it feels like we're a young country who recognizes the strength in culture. And I'm speaking on behalf of everybody here, but there are a few who would disagree with that believe they come from a land where they, if you don't make it, then you're out kind of thing. And yeah, there's ways to deal with those kind of people. I don't know what they are, but you sit down and have a good talk with them. But we're ultimately, we've got the advantage of being small, isolated, an example of what it looks like when Indigenous cultures aren't lifted up. And I think we're at a place now, Gillian, where we have enough Māori leaders in great positions to seek examples. Back in the day, all I grew up seeing was Māori people being arrested, or, we'd have Crime Watch on TV, and it's like, I tell you what, every single criminal that they were looking for had the description of Māori, 6'2", blah, blah, blah. And it's a genuine tool of colonization where you just beat the next generation down. If you're Māori, this is what you'll see on TV. There were no Māori people in the CEO jobs. There's no one hiring their mates. Māoris, didn't trust the police. We've gone through this period where now, when you're the number one podcast in our country is 3 Māori guys who don't swear, who are open with their feelings and emotions, who are quite happy to make sure that we are uplifting on our journey, making sure that, I remember someone said a great saying when, was it Dikembe Mutombo, where you don't, just because I'm up the top, I make sure I leave the ladder for others to climb up too, kind of thing. And that kind of mentality, we see the importance of where our journey's at and how we look around. And we've got Stephen Adams, who's Tongan, but Māori as well. He's playing in the NBA. A lot of our All Blacks are Māori. Yeah. We've got such great leaders now in the community that I would think little old me growing up in Tokomaru Bay or Gisborne now would have so many cool role models that I can aspire to be sitting at the tables that we deserve to be sitting in. And that hasn't come from kicking doors down. That's come from a determination that Māori have had in them forever. Māoris were the ones who stayed in the canoes while we came down through Asia. The Samoans jumped off. Oh, this is an island. The stubbornest of Polynesians kept rowing. And it's cold. Don't get me wrong. It's cold and tiring. Imagine stopping, going past Tonga and being like, oh, wow, look at this island. This is beautiful. No. The most stubborn of Polynesians kept
I never
on
thought
rowing.
Of that.
So you've got the grittiest, most gnarliest indigenous culture who knows struggle, who chose struggle over islands where they could have been quite happy to keep going until they reach this land. And there's no secret that this is the one indigenous culture in the world that the British colony could not knock over, that they had to introduce the Treaty of Waitangi because they could not break this tribe of people, these people who lived on this land. No matter how many soldiers came down, they were never ever going to win this battle. The Treaty of Waitangi or Te Tiriti or Waitangi was put in place simply because there was no way of knocking this indigenous culture out. These people were for real. They had fought their whole way down to the actual part to be a part of Aotearoa, and then they'd fought each other for years before the British turned up and tried battles, and they were ferocious fighters. So it's no coincidence that we are where we are, and why this culture still breathes strongly through everybody in this country. We've fought all along, and I guess seeing what happens in this country and seeing how the fighting hasn't stopped, but it's a different kind of battle now. It's arming our youth, it's giving them pride in the culture, and it's making sure that they carry it on further as we move forward.
Amazing. So the connection with land, with water, I guess, as well, with the ocean, how present is that in all of this, in this sense of pride in Maori culture, the kind of living, breathing culture that is today, rather than sort of an ancient wisdom, perhaps? How present is that in your everyday?
Yeah, for us and as a people, it's always believed that Mother Earth or Papatua Nuku, and we know the stories. We get told the stories as we get older. And Tangaroa is the sea, the gods of it. Yeah, it seems weird because it does sound a bit when I think about it. It does sound a bit philosophical, but it feels so normal saying it for me, if that makes sense. It does seem like God of water, God of sea, God of the air, kind of thing. But it is taught to us that way, that it just seems normal. So we are caretakers of this land. We are caretakers of the sea. We can't expect anything from it if we don't care for it. We are the tangata whenua. We are the people of the land. So decisions to be made need to be decisions that are made for our tamariki or our kids, generations after us. These aren't decisions that are made for us now. These are the decisions that will be, that our kids will bear the fruit of those decisions. Has always been a strong pull for Māori, and has always been, and one of our political parties is it's tamariki decisions was their byline as we were heading into elections at the Te Pāti Māori Party. We're making generational decisions. So our ability to keep pristine water, to not be mining for oil or gas, keeping all that in Australia, or letting them ruin their earth is such an important thing for Māori people, because there is a genuine connection to the land. It's fed them for generations. It's a big part of who and what they are. We belong to this land, and we owe it to this land to make sure that we respect it, we love it, we help it, we nourish it. That's the journey of being Māori. Now, that's where we find these big clashes, because that's not a corporate vision. A corporate vision is make as much money as quickly as possible, and who cares about the land? And that's why it's always been the Māori people's duty to fight for everything that we've always had or what we've got. And I sit in a unique position. I grew up in a Pākehā family, so I understand the corporate chat. I can sit at the room and I can talk in that sense. But do you know how beautiful it is to live for something more than just your wallet? Like, the idea behind living for something more than money is a Maori way of life. And I think I want to circle back to Te Pāti Māori, because they said some amazing things for me as a 43-year-old leading into the election. And people were like, well, what would we do with a Māori-led government? Like, what on earth would you guys be doing? And they said, it was Rawiri Waititi, who's one of the leaders of the party. He said, have you ever experienced going to a marae? Now, a marae is the meeting place for our people. So it's, you may have seen videos of them. They're usually an archway. It's a very traditional meeting place. And we have many, many marae in this country. And it'd be like we would treat our land as a marae. No one would go hungry. Work would be working the land, but working it for the right reasons. Corporations would have to fall in line with how Māori traditions are done. You would have to consider the damage that you're doing as you're making that money. All these kind of philosophies. Now, for a country that is as old as ours, that has spent a lot of time under the colonized rules, for me to sit there, and I sat there, I went, imagine it. Just imagine what that would be like. And I've spent time at maraes, and it's true. Everyone pitches in for the feed. Everyone pitches in, and everyone has a laugh, and the food's all there. No one goes hungry. The idea of opening up Aotearoa so that was it. That we aren't all scrapping for land, and we're not trying to make the quick dollar anymore. We're actually, we're coming together as a community, as a whole community, and we're driving towards the future. But our mindset is all about making decisions for the next generation rather than ourselves right here, right now. We're fed, we're good. So what can we now go out and do to this earth, to the sea, to whatever it takes to make sure that our generations to come have this pristine land to live on?
We're going to take a quick break to do a shout out to our sponsors, Triodos Bank UK, an ethical and sustainable bank that's a bit of an outlier as far as good banks go. Good, not just because they win awards like the British Bank Awards for Best Ethical Financial Provider, but good, as you would expect, because they do good, by making sure that their customers' deposits only go to the real economy, financing social and environmental enterprises and projects that will bring about positive change. So Triodos is a relatively small fish in a big pond, but in striving to be an authentic alternative bank for people like you and me, they're creating ripples on the surface of that pond, and they're leading the way in showing how banking can be different. And I'm really proud to have Triodos Bank UK as the exclusive sponsors of If I Rule the World. That's a beautiful vision, man. I mean, it's quite extraordinary that sort of entering political discourse, as you say, in the last election cycle. So it sort of feels like a good junction to do our gear change into this thought experiment game, whatever, of if you rule the world, what would you do? It sounds like you've kind of had a little taste of that vision. So Mark, can
I just say before we go there, because there's this, I reckon you'll vibe with this explanation. So there was this, I was having this conversation with a guy who's from the Kohanga generation. So this is a person who has spent their entire schooling education. They're now in their mid-20s and they speak fluent Māori. They've been educated purely Māori, still obviously English speaking as well, but know the traditions, know everything. Now, I didn't get the chance to be that. When I say I didn't get the chance, that's not anybody else. That's my own responsibility to now go and connect to my culture and make sure that I know it through and through. And that's a journey I intend to take, and I have that luxury of doing that at some stage. But he'd had it fully ingrained into him. And I was having this conversation to him around a real easy explanation for anyone who is familiar with the board game Monopoly. Now, you know Monopoly, right? You play that up north. I'm pretty sure you guys brought it to us down here. Do you know how many families have scrapped because of that game? You know what I mean? Like,
every Christmas. Ruined Christmas.
Every Christmas. Anyways, what I was saying was, him and I was sitting there, and what dawned on me was the example that before the British came to New Zealand, and if it wasn't the British, it was going to be the Spanish. Or if it wasn't the Spanish, it was going to be the French. Whatever. Someone was going to arrive on these shores, and someone was going to try take it for their own. Maori people were masters of playing the game of chess. So they could already trade. They were already making trades. They could already sail, clearly. They knew how to weave their own blankets. They knew how to cultivate their own food. They already had their own exports happening. So they'd pretty much established themselves as the people of the land. So they were doing pretty damn well. Then all of a sudden, the British came. And they've decided, look, what we play up north is we play this game called Monopoly. It's all about property and it's all about this and that and blah, 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 blah. And before the Māori got a chance to put chess to them as the game we're going to be playing in this country, all of a sudden Monopoly landed over the top of their board. Now you've got generations of people who have played Monopoly, buying property, running banks, go to jail, all these things that were so unfamiliar with the indigenous culture. And they've got hundreds of years trying to catch up as to getting good at this game so that we start getting the land. We start knowing how to get free tax, all those kinds of things. We're learning a whole new board game, but was placed on us. And there's a 100-year head start happening with the British. So now all of a sudden, what we're finding, and this is probably the best way of putting it, is, we're starting to get good at the game of Monopoly now. Like we're starting to make some inroads. And there's a real fear. That's where the fear comes from. Like, holy shit, we can't just run rampant over the indigenous culture now. They're really good. They own land. They're politically sound. They're lawyers. They're influencers. They've got people in the roles that they never had at the very start of this game of Monopoly. And that's where we find ourselves right now, is like, we actually, it's taken us a few generations to learn because we knew how to play chess, but okay, we're playing Monopoly here now. And now that's where I feel like we're at a point now where, and again, with our podcast, it's so important to be having the conversations that are then had in the whānau homes at the table when they're eating meals. They're carrying on those conversations. Well, some of them at least. Some of them are more just for entertainment. But it's important for us to make sure that our people are having the same conversations that we're having on the podcast, because those are the conversations that need to be had so that we make great political decisions, so that we make we are a power to contend with.
To be honest, I also think, that's a freaking great analogy, by the way, but I think the question that arises a lot, particularly because the kind of guests I have on and the conversations I have even off the podcast, is, do we want to keep playing Monopoly? Do we want to change the game? Right? So I don't know where you're at with
100%. I'm at the point where this is how evil, this is an inside evil thought of mine, but there's nothing more amazing than beating someone at their own game. And as I say, we're a small nation, but it's a culture that I think, like, I'm proud that you would look over these ways, that you would write about us in a magazine. I'm proud that that's what we've been able to achieve. When you fly into Australia, right? Like we recently went over to Perth to do a live show, which was super cool. And we had some First Nations people meet us at the airport and perform a welcome for us to come along. And we would do the same. If there was a group of people, of First Nations or Indigenous people coming over to Aotearoa for an assignment, Māori would then welcome them onto the land. And it's so beautiful. Like, just to know that you have been given their grace to be doing your activity, whether it be a live show, whether you're dancing, whether you're just shopping, whatever it is, you are welcome to the land. It's such a deep connection to not only the land, but the culture of the people you're with. And I actually feel sorry for people who don't get that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you just get off a plane, you just walk in. No. What's happened here is the indigenous culture, the local mob from this area in Australia, they'll welcome you onto their land. You've been given a spiritual guide to be a part of what it is that they have here. They want you here. They welcome you here. It's such a deeper connection to not only land, but to you as a person and to spirit, to the land. For people who have never experienced it, and that's where that's what I love about, like, what I've seen in you, and that's what I've loved about doing research on you, is like, I'm like, you get this. You'll understand what I'm saying.
So you're right. I get it. In some ways, like, you and I, there's quite a lot of similarities, more than perhaps I realized. So you're very, very sort of a good spokesman for Maori culture, but you've acknowledged that you're half and half, if you like. And in some ways, like I'm very, very proud of being born into Kenyan culture, but I'm not indigenous Kenyan. I'm a Creole. So actually my sort of story is that, I mean, without going into the whole thing, but essentially all my grandparents are island people, Seychelles, Trinidad, Sri Lanka, etc. So I'm very mixed, and I'm very fascinated in indigenous culture, probably because I don't feel like I can claim any because I'm so mixed. And I've definitely had that experience in the States working, this is years ago, on a natural history shoot. And I think he was Navajo, and great guy, but there was a lot of secrecy around their culture. So he had a Navajo name, but he wouldn't tell anyone non-Navajo what his Navajo name was. So his English name was Ricky. And there were lots of sacred sites around where we wanted to film, where he would tell us kind of where not to go, but we would never be shown these sites. So there's a lot of secrecy. And I understand why. It was from a lack of trust. And I kind of thought, because I'm Black, that I would somehow be welcomed into the culture. And it was really like, oh, wow, even me, you're not going to tell me the secrets. So I find that thing of being welcomed onto the land is being invited to approach with humility. I mean, obviously enjoy yourself, feel relaxed, but there's a kind of degree of humility as well. And then maybe that sort of starts to
100%.
encourage people to kind of like, don't trash the place while you're here, because we really love this place.
That's the thing. Like, you're so right. Like, the difference between going to somebody's house where you're welcome and you're like, it's as simple as that. It's following the rules of that house. So if it's take your shoes off at the front door, it's take your shoes off at the front door. That's just the way it is. And there is a sense of responsibility when you are recognized and you are, you have been welcomed onto the land. You're there, so look after it, kind of thing. You do feel that. I wanted to touch on something you said, because I did find it very, very interesting about not a justification, but it is this is something I've noticed is it's a very colonizing tool, the idea that we're not enough of something. So you don't tend to hear, like, this is just my experience, but if you're in New Zealand and you ask, oh, where's your ancestry from? What's the story for you? And they go, oh, I'm a bit Irish and I'm a bit English and I've got a little bit of Welsh in me. And you're like, okay, cool. When you talk to people who are of an indigenous culture of color, there's like I feel like I'm not quite. There's a real kind of feeling that you're not Maori enough. You don't have you're not Kenyan enough. You don't connect there. So, but are you really? You sound another great tool.
Yeah.
You don't sound that. You don't sound Maori. You don't sound, and it's a real kind of, and I feel like it's almost twofold now in this country, because we've gone from it being like, oh, you're not Maori, you're not that Maori though, to, well, you don't speak Maori. Like, so you've got the extremes on two ends now. You've got the people who want to tell you you're not enough Maori to be Maori, you don't have enough Maori blood in you. And we have the luxury also of knowing that there are no 100% Maori blood people anymore. Like, the bloodline has been watered down enough to be, it's very seldom you find anyone with more than, I don't know, half caste Maori. So,
right.
But it's such a colonizing tool to make you feel not enough, and it doesn't exist for us, because I talk it from a British standpoint, right? They are the ones who have come here. It's never something you hear them talk about, like, oh yeah, but I'm only a little bit English, or yeah, but I'm only half Scottish. Like, it's never something you hear from them, but you hear plenty of Maori people going, oh, I'm not quite Maori enough, or I haven't quite got that. And you touched on it there, like it's not that you don't feel like you are enough of something, but there's a real feeling that you are missing something for you to feel complete. It's something you will never, ever hear the Europeans ever saying. The Europeans will, like, the European skin will never, ever be like, yeah, but I'm only a tiny bit Scottish, I don't feel. And that to us has been a big thing, getting through that here in New Zealand, is unpicking some of those tools that we actually use against ourselves without really even knowing the damage it does.
That's really fascinating. I've never considered that. That's why I sort of, sitting from where I am, like looking metaphorically speaking across the other side of the planet, going, what's going on there? And what are they getting right? Again, just kind of going back into the relationship with earth, with land, with nature, with the sea and the ocean. That feels a really important part of the story. So if you rule the world, Mark, like, what would you do? What would you ban? What policies would you enact?
where would I start? What would I
Oh
do?
my gosh.
Oh my goodness. I think I'd flip the world upside down, but from the lens of leadership. So
Mhm.
if we truly are looking for what's best for this planet, we actually need to be looking at what matters to the next generation. I've got a 12-year-old daughter who I would argue is much smarter than me at the best of times. But also, she has much more invested in what this planet looks like moving forward. At 43, I've done my dash. Like, let's be honest. Like,
Come
I've
on.
peaked. I've peaked. Absolutely peaked. There's nothing more for me. But no, it does fascinate me because, and I'll be honest, I didn't think of this before our local elections, and the Maori Party did paint this vision, saying and talking about the idea behind tamariki decisions. What's our next generational? Our mokopuna decisions was the words they use, and mokopuna is our grandchildren. So that's another generation on. Now, let's not get it twisted. I'm not saying I'm putting a 6-year-old in charge, but what I do want to do is I want to make sure that whatever decisions are being made, they are ultimately the ones who are going to be affected. Not 10 years from now, not 20 years from now. I'm talking 40, 50, 60 years from now. And that should be a responsibility. It's the idea behind planting fruit trees that we'll never, ever bear the fruit of. So how do we achieve that? And I think that my first move is to get some real spokespeople in that are, and ask them about what's important to them right now. Ask them about what's new. What are the things that they care about? What are the things that they would like to see? What interests them? What are the things that matter to them? And that should be where I start my focusing, and that's where my lens begins. It needs to be a future view, and to get that future view, it's not going to come from me. Like I said, I'm clocking out soon. Like I'm.
Wow. I'm like, if you're clocking out, I should be laying down now. But I mean, I see what you're saying, and I like that. But within Maori culture, would you say that there is a place for the elder as well? I'm really hoping you're going to say yes to this, by the way, because no, I'm
do you
kidding,
know what the elders do though? Like, absolutely, there's a massively important role for my generation, for yours, but like for our generation, we're there to steer the ship. We're not there to tell the ship where it's going though. Like, our job is to remind them of the lessons that we've learned. Is to help them make these decisions, but we're not making the decisions. I like, you'll know it too. Like, and I think everybody who's listening will know it. Have you ever looked inside the Parliament chambers and go to yourself, man, there is no one that looks like me, or there is no one who I would actually invite over to my house to hang out, because they are so distant from who we are and what we are. And yet these are the decision makers that are happening. These are the people who are deciding whether we'll have a world in 20 years' time. Like, they're so different to who. There's no one who you can really look at in the Parliament buildings in this country, at least, where you sit there and go. Now we've got a luxury of a couple. There's Chloe Swarbrick is a genuine superstar of politics. So Chloe Swarbrick is our Green Party leader. She is so intelligent. Beyond, like, she could lose me in 3 words. She'll say words that are way too big. And I'm not saying that that's what makes intelligence, but her emotional intelligence to encapsulate what happens on a Maori, and she isn't Maori, but on a Maori stand base, and how she can interact that into her policy and what is important, blows my mind. So there is somebody who I can look at in our parliamentary system and go, Chloe Swarbrick. And then I just love the idea of, we have Te Pāti Māori in our parliament now, and they ruffle feathers, and they are unapologetically Māori. They are unapologetically Māori, and I love that. But what I think for me on my first day of changing this world around and making it happen is that parliament needs to look like what I see when I walk down the street. Not suits and high-paid people who have been the most popular people in this certain part of town, so they get the job. I need to see the guy when I open up the door and I see the butcher. I need to see someone like a him. I need to make our leaders be people who are real people, who know the struggle, wanting to make decisions for the grandchildren of our grandchildren. Those kinds of philosophies is where I'm headed with my new world order. Can I call it my new world order?
Yeah, according to Mark. I mean,
Yeah.
I used to go along with that sort of, I want to see people that look like me. Our experience in this country is that just because people look like me doesn't mean they think like me. We've had some
This is true.
pretty shocking, examples of that. I'm not going to name any names, so everyone knows what I'm talking about. But but I think I see what you're saying. It's actually more about sort of grassroots. People have had lived experience and have the same experiences that we have as people not in positions of power, and regardless of what we look like. I'm really all for that. Is there anything that you would ban outright?
This is going to sound stupid. I have thought about this. I'm going to abolish shame.
Oh, okay.
I think shame is the one thing that holds everyone back from being who they truly want to be.
Mm,
So the emotion, whatever it is, it's probably not an emotion, whatever that is, shame,
mhm,
the idea of being embarrassed by something, it's gone. That's the
mhm,
first thing I'm abolishing. I don't know how I do that as a world leader, but I don't know whether anyone's ever stopped to think about just how crippling shame can be. The embarrassment, the shame of doing something, the shame of
mhm,
being who you truly are. I think if more and more people were strong enough to be who they truly actually are, not who they think people think they want to be, who they, what this job dictates them and wants them to be, what their parents have told them they should be. If they can just
mhm.
lose that feeling of shame to just truly engage on who and what they are and belonging, I think the world would straight away be such a wonderful place. I don't know how you do it,
Yeah.
but shame is so crippling, and I don't think people have given it enough airtime to think about just how things would be different. Just imagine you in your own life right now. What would be different if you wouldn't be embarrassed, if you didn't feel shame, if you were just like, you know what? I'm wearing it. I don't even care. Like that. It's just some. You know what I mean? Like it can be. I'm not even caring about what anyone else is thinking. I'm going to go ahead and take this opportunity to do this.
Yeah.
That's one thing I feel like. What's stopping me from connecting to my culture fully? What's stopping me from going back? It's a little bit of embarrassment. There's a little bit of shame there. If I can get rid of that, I'm
Mm.
connecting to. What's stopping me from really learning about Maori or flying to New Zealand or Aotearoa and embracing it because it looks like a place that, I'm a little bit scared that I might not be a part of or might not be
Mm.
accepted. Like, if you can abolish shame, I reckon this world in general becomes an ultimately better place.
There's another aspect of that you've just maybe, a little light bulb has gone on, which is the shame, because I guess I live in a I live in a very white part of the UK, in Cornwall. And
It sounds white.
yeah, it is. I mean, it's a peninsula. It's really far away from any of the urban centers. So just by default, it's not a very diverse part of the country. And when you said shame about, how would I embrace my culture more? I think shame has got a real part to play in the difficulty. And I say this knowing I've got like a white producer and a white editor on this podcast. And I really love the fact that they are on this show because I think it brings balance to our conversations. And I guess, it's so weird because I can see their little boxes and little letters on their names. This, I know they're listening. But the reason why I say that is I think one of the experiences I have when I talk or I listen to other people talk about the kind of process of colonization, the trauma that's kind of spilled into sort of multiple generations and still playing out in various parts of the world, is that it triggers guilt and shame. And one of the things that I find really curious is that where I expect someone to just go, oh, wow, that was really shit. And a lot of people do. So I will say that. But there's a kind of like, it's not necessarily guilt. It's just sort of like humility, maybe again, that I sort of hope to get. But I think shame gets in the way. Do you see what I'm saying? Does that make any sense?
It does. It makes heaps of sense. I had this. I had a great moment when I was working on a radio station called Today FM, and I was talking with one of our great cricketers. His name was Mark Richardson. He's a
Mhm.
broadcaster in this country, and he scored 100 at Lords and let everyone know about it. Lovely guy who I get on really, really well with, and actually really enjoy being around. But he is a typical middle-aged white male who is refusing to hear the words privileged. Now, I also noticed the color of your two producers as well, and they sound like lovely people and actually helped me get my sound sorted. So this is never a dig, all right? This is never a dig. The great thing that I found with Mark Richardson was we had this great debate around privilege. And all I wanted him to see was to feel his privilege, just sense privilege. But he refused to feel privileged at all. And so I broke it down, and there was this, I'd seen something on the internet which I helped break it down. It was like, there's the inherited privilege, and then there's the acquired privilege, and two very separate things. Don't confuse the two. And I'm only bringing this here because I feel like the walls go up when people start to feel like they had a better run at life than someone else, and everyone gets defensive and it gets horrible. Now, the difference between an inherited privilege and an acquired privilege is massively different. And if you can explain that to people who put their walls up, and it generally is British in this country, the British colonizers or the Pākehā skin people, they'll sit there and be like, what do you mean? My parents, no. My parents grew up. They had to do it tough. We didn't have anything cool growing up. That's fine. That's called an acquired privilege. That's something that's been earned through hard work and sweat and tears. But the inherited privileges, the ones that you get that statistically can be backed up in terms of your health care, like you're going to live longer as an inherited privilege if you have white skin in this country. You're going to have a better chance at earning more money if you have pale skin. These are inherited privileges that you got from having white skin. It doesn't stop there, though. Let's break it down even further. You've got inherited privilege if you're a male. I'm always going to have more potential to earn money than you. So now all of a sudden, I'm in a part of this privilege conversation. You know, despite being Maori as well, I might have lost out on the years living, but in the healthcare and what have you. But I'm a male, so I've got more chance now than a female in life. The list goes on for all the inherited privileges, not to be confused with the acquired privileges, which is where your parents have worked day in and day out, and they've got you the ability to have a house. You've now got a generational house that you can sell that property, and your kids get that property, and so on and so on. The ability to work hard and get yourself a really good job. Now, sure, there's a couple of inherited privileges there as well. The fact that you're a male, that you're white, that you got the gift of the gab because of your parents were able to educate you well. That's all been added into the hard work that you've done, which comes into the acquired privileges that made you get to where you are. So don't take away the fact that you've worked really hard to get there, but understand. And I only say all this because what you said around that recognition of some of the trauma that you recognize is also intertwined with a lot of people, of especially Maori in this country. It's just an acknowledgement of the privilege. And when you have that conversation, the walls all go down. They're like, I get it. I get it. Because once you can knock down those walls, then you can start really working on the problems that do put the indigenous cultures behind in education, puts them behind in healthcare, puts them behind in ability to earn money, because we knock down those privileges, walls, and we can talk about it, we can discuss it. There's a feeling of vindication there for those who are going through what they're going through, and real conversations of change can happen.
So you've managed to achieve this by abolishing shame. Doesn't matter how you did it. It's all good. It doesn't exist anymore. There's been a sort of honest, open conversation around trauma and privileges, and people have arrived with humility at the table. And now you've got the global tax part.
Now the global tax part.
Yeah. Oh, is this where it gets crazy?
This is above my pay grade. I'm not going to even claim to know what I'd be doing when it comes to that. I think, the world and where we're at and how money is being made at the cost of our future has to change. And you know what? May I be the first guest to request help in this matter? I don't know enough about how the tax system should work in this world to work on a global level. I don't know. I understand why we get taxed, but I don't know what we need to be taxing to make things better. I don't know how I would set us up to win, not only now, but then also into the future. And I wouldn't claim to know. I think that's where I will rule the world. Is that
a sign of a great leader? You get a good team around you, but it sounds like you've identified very quickly the problem you want to solve, or you want people to help you solve as world leader,
Yes.
which is
Yeah.
making money now off the back of the future, which, yeah, and when you say it like that, it sounds utterly crazy.
I feel like too, like I've always been a believer in having your cake and eating it too. I love that saying, having your cake and eating it too. Like we don't need to be doing things. And sorry to skip all the way back to the start of the conversation and thinking about a Maori-led way in this country where everyone is fed. It's so mind-boggling, but it isn't, because it happens on a marae every single day. But for us outside the marae, we're like, it's too mind-boggling. How on earth could you feed that many people? Well, you would just think about it like everyone is part of the whānau. Everyone is a part of this family. Everyone is a part of this moving beast. And we're all trying to achieve the same thing, which is a healthy family. It's a warm home. It's enjoyment of life, right? Those are three key things that we're all trying to achieve. We want healthy family members, healthy us, healthy lifestyle. We want to be fed and we want warm in a beautiful place we call home. There's no, let's burn down these trees to make $1 zillion. Like that doesn't, we don't need to do that. But if we can all be focused in that same, like on those same three things, and we do it holistically, it's not that crazier way of thinking.
It's not a crazy way of thinking at all. It sort of actually, even as you describe it, there's that sense of like, you're kind of just relaxing into this sense of like, oh, there isn't going to be a struggle. I don't need to compete for this stuff. How it's achieved, it's a good question. But on a micro scale, on a community level, it is possible. So what if every community just took care of each other? Like, what would happen then? So let's do who you would surround yourself with, which I think is like all good leaders. You get yourself a good team. So who would that be and why?
I'm glad you asked, Gillian. My list is not that impressive, if I'm being honest. Like I don't have a list of famous stars or people who necessarily would know, but I would have my group of people would be very heavily influenced by children, to be fair, in a visual way. But I think what we've got here in New Zealand is a really cool mixture of people who understand the importance of culture, land, and everything coming together. So I'm going to choose a couple of New Zealand politicians. One is Rawiri Waititi. He is the leader of our Maori party, and he is the one who came up with the idea. Well, he is part of the idea of making mokopuna decisions, which I love that way of thinking. I think, as I stated before, it's so important to make sure that what we're doing now, and my decisions, in my reign, I need to make sure that they're going to be decisions that are going to be good for the next generation and their generation afterwards. And I'm also going to include Chloe Swarbrick, who, if you don't know about Chloe Swarbrick and you haven't had a chance to, jump on Instagram and look at some of the amazing things she's done. And I wouldn't be surprised if she isn't our next Prime Minister. She has everything. She has encapsulated both Māori and European, and she has made sure that no one is left on the way, and everything she says, every fact that she states, heavily with statistics, she's done her research. She's just so intelligent. So they're on my team. And ultimately, I'm just the guy who's, people have voted for because I'm so likable.
And humble.
Yeah. And I'm going to put my dog on there too. This is my dog, Priest.
There he is. What's his name?
This is Priest. He's 14 years old.
Wow.
And he's certainly on my leadership team.
Yeah.
I honestly have no idea how he's still alive.
And for that reason alone, he's on your team.
He's on my team, yeah. A real battler.
Yeah, just for pure resilience alone. Speaking of the earth, I just wondered if you could share the Maori origin story of life, the earth. Is that something that you've been told yourself? Is that something you had to go and find? Does it exist?
It does. Yes. No. There's plenty of tales that go around, but for us, there was Papatūānuku, who was Mother Earth, and then the Sky Father were together, and they had children. And Maui's the most famous of the children, and Maui obviously a lot of people would have been introduced to Maui in the Disney movie. Yeah. So
Yep. Moana, yeah.
it's the same Maui. Yeah, Moana.
Yeah.
That's the same Maui that we have all the way from Hawaii is also a part of Māori legend in Aotearoa.
Oh, right.
So it's all intertwined. We're all a part of the same culture. But Maui pushed both. He was sick of the darkness, so pushed both his father and mother apart. He also was responsible for fishing up the North Island with a great big Maui's hook. Fished up the North Island, so we got the South Island and the North Island, and that's the tale that we're all told growing up in this country. And Maui is, you'll never guess this too as well, like the sun used to just go straight over it and it would only be 10 minutes of daylight. But Maui got out his old hook and some of the boys threw big ropes over the sun, gave it a hiding, and it slowed down after that day. So it's it is what it is. But those
that's
stories,
the story. Can't argue with it, right?
Yeah. You know, what? You're going to argue with Maui? He's got a hook. He'll give you a hiding as well. But those are the beautiful tales that we get told as children. But we're also the actual genealogy story of how we did row down from Hawaii, from Asia. We made our way down through the Pacific, kept on rowing until we landed in the land of the long white cloud, as it's nicknamed. And the tribes split up. There were different canoes that went to different areas of Aotearoa. They set up. Those tribes are still very much recognized. So I come from the tribe Ngāti Porou, which is ended up on the east coast. The Ngāti Porou people it's a very, very big tribe. Rumored to have the best looking people in the tribe. I didn't come up with that.
It was absolutely nothing to do with you, obviously.
I don't make the rules. I just follow them. But no, there's a real kind of cheekiness about kind of where each tribe sits in this. And those tribes were at war from the moment they landed. There was a real indigenous war, and it was brutal. So when the Europeans arrived on these shores, as I said earlier on, they were in for a shit show of trying to take this land over and thinking that they could bring one boat down. And like the amount of time it takes to get down here to bring recruitment, it was never ever going to. They were never ever going to settle that or colonize the land as easily as they could anywhere else, because the isolation of Aotearoa, but then also the people. And we're ferocious people. It's, you put us on a rugby field where we can legally, destroy you and take the ball off you, take what ours and score tries. Like there's no coincidence that all the way down here, 6 million, and we are this good at certain sports because we've been doing it for years.
And also just that haka. I'm sorry. I know you're like, we've seen it all. It's impressive. The display of aggression and that willingness to fight, which is not something that particularly in sort of like modern society, whatever you want to call it, it's not always welcome in polite society, yet on a rugby pitch, and people love it. I remember seeing the first haka back in the 90s, and we loved it. Like everyone wanted to be a New Zealander because it was just like, I want to be able to do that. And I mean, it would look ridiculous me doing the haka, I have to be honest, but it is that sense of like together you dial up this kind of, it's like a code set, and a warning of like, this is what's coming at you. It's just super impressive, right?
Something to keep in mind with the haka as well is that a lot of people think of it as being like a show of strength. The haka, the most beautiful thing about the haka is depending on the setting and where it is, it means so many different things. But the one thing that it absolutely means is respect. So if someone is performing a haka in front of you, it's a sign of respect. Now, there are hakas done at funerals where the casket will be lifted up and it'll be taken out of the funeral home. The haka is performed. That's a sign of respect. That's a sign of the effect that you've had on these people's lives at this moment. This is a sign of respect to not only the person who has passed, but also the family members who are there. It can be used during a big achievement. If someone's, you'll see someone might win an award and there'll be Māoris in the crowd and they'll stand up and they'll do kamate or they'll do a haka for the person who's received that. Again, a sign of respect. And last of all, on a sports field, not only is it laying down a challenge, but you only ever look to challenge yourself and your opponents if you respect them. So if there's a haka being performed, it's usually a challenge that we're up for this. We respect you and we're up for this and we're coming for you just as we expect you to come to us. So it's a beautiful,
Wow.
it's so much more than a lot of people. And like, that's why people are like, oh, we've seen the haka. What are these guys doing? It's so ignorant, because you'll sit there and go, well, they're doing this haka for a real reason. The people who are performing it are doing it
Yeah.
because there's a real connection to this person who they're doing it for. It might be the love and respect that they pass. It might be the love and respect that we're about to get into a heated battle here, and this is a challenge, and it's going to go down. But we respect you, and this is a sign of respect to do a haka. The worst thing you can do, it's like anything in life, if you don't love it and you don't hate it, you're indifferent to it. If you don't get a haka performed to you, well, then, you're in real
Oh,
trouble.
wow.
They're indifferent to you. No, I'm joking. I'm joking.
Well, I'm glad you unpicked that, because I did not know that. So where would you retire to? Like, what's your happy place?
Maybe I retire back to the place that I need to go to connect with my culture. Maybe that's the last thing I can do. Maybe that's my last. I'll go back to Tokomaru Bay on the east coast of Aotearoa. It's a very small, basic east coast town. There's a dairy. There's a pub. You're an hour away, or maybe an hour. No, it's probably hour 40 to the closest supermarket. You live off the land. It's beachfront property, so everything's like beautiful seafood, and it's a very culturally strong Ngāti Porou area where the people belong and to the land, and the land belongs to the people, and there's a real beautiful cycle of and that's where my marae is, and that's where I will eventually go back to. So what better way than to take my little podcast kit, teach the next generation how to press record, how to turn your headphones up, how to turn the microphone on, and give back. Because I think our people, Māori people especially, and Polynesians in general, best storytellers on the globe. Like, best storytellers ever. The way you'll know listening to the podcast, the way Jordan starts a story and just holds you in it. Like, there's no better. We're neck and neck with the Americans. The Americans have a really good way of telling a story as well. Like, they're performers. But I think the more opportunities and the more I can then give back to the community that I come from, the better the storytellers, the stronger the culture grows. And you'll hear more podcasts coming out of Aotearoa.
Language, stories, it's alive. It's like an organism carrying and evolving the knowledge and the culture that makes us who we are, gives us a sense of belonging and a connection to Earth. And that word, whānau, which loosely is translated as family, but I'm, after this conversation, absolutely convinced it means so much more. And I guess, as Mark put it himself, whānau is that feeling of everyone being part of one moving beast. And I love it. There's so much to unpack in this episode. Please let me know what your takeaways are. You can comment on Spotify. You can email the show on podcast@gillianburkevoice.com. As ever, listen, like, follow, share the podcast, help spread the word. Let us grow this beautiful community. Let's grow this movement. Let's make connections. Let's start lighting up this dark and bleak, bloody landscape with beacons of light so we can find each other. I don't think for a second, frankly, I'm going to say this, I don't think for a second my podcast or any one podcast is going to change the world. But I do believe it's the little incremental changes, the imperceptible changes that start in the heart and in the mind that all of a sudden might just start pushing us towards a tipping point. And of course, there's always going to be those equal and opposite forces pushing against this. Maybe that's what this is, an eternal tug of war, an eternal battle between light and dark. And our job on this earth, in our life here, is to keep pushing to make sure the dark never extinguishes the light. I really love you guys. Thank you so much for listening. And God, quite emotional. As you take a moment and take a breath, just ask yourself, if you rule the world, what would you do? Thanks for listening.